So, research design. Oh, the text down there, sorry. That's mostly to tell me what to say. So, my understanding of the data that's available, Christian, and I could be assuming you don't have things that you do or vice versa, is that you have the share of the land settled in each township and year, you have the average farm size, you have some cost shifters, which is what I'll call cost shifters, which is the Zs. We have some price shifters, net price of, all sorts of cost shifters, and then we've got the land, the government land prices, if you actually just directly purchasing land from the government. We don't have, it's in the model, but we don't have farm output, we don't have that consumption division, we don't have wealth, and we don't have output prices, right? That were
prices we can have, but anything at the level of I is just the model, not
right.
the data.
Right,
the data
right.
is at the level of J.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. No, it's. So are output prices being used?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got it based on the product, the most common products of the.
Yeah,
area?
we can do something like a price-weighted suitability measures.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now the model has parameters of production function, and some sort of output price function, which we just discussed. Parameters of utility function, the congestion cost function. It wasn't. I wasn't clear on which of these parameters are being estimated, whether they're, whether you have identification results for them, or whether some of the identification is coming off of parametric assumptions. When you talk about this, you talked about the information. You talked about the farm size differences, how those who had obtained land through homestead generally tend to have smaller overall holdings than those who had just purchased outright. And that's already taken away in that average farm size measure. And so I wonder if there's some unexploited information in farm size by homesteaders versus non-homesteaders that is implied by your model that you're not exploiting yet. All right, now, I was a little confused by the timeline. So here's my understanding of the timeline. Year S, the settler goes, finds a suitable piece of land, settles on it, goes to the land office, applies for the 160-acre homestead. 5 years later, goes back to the land office, establishes that he has satisfied the residency and improvement requirements, and applies for the actual title to that land. At some point in the intervening period, the direct land purchase is made as well. I'm not sure whether we should think of that as happening at the beginning or at the same time that the final homestead is granted. So it makes me wonder, from the point of view of your empirical model, which of these two events are you calling settlement? And I think, based on the way you described the data, it's once the actual title is granted at the end of the 5-year period. So that raises the question. So that raises the issue. 5 years is actually a really long time, especially in this time period. How quickly, anything in 19th century U.S. history, right? 5 years is an eternity. So the Homestead Act is passed in 1862. The very first actual homestead is granted in 1868. You were talking about...
Which is why the 1870 map has almost no homesteads.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, and you're talking about the railroads, for example. The Transcontinental Railroad is finished in 1869, or the first one. And the second and third in early 1880s. So a lot happens in 5 years, and so I think it matters a lot whether you're calling somebody as settling in year S or year S plus 5.
Right.
When is a cash purchase usually made? And does that differ between homesteaders and non-homesteaders? So if I'm not homesteading, do I make the cash purchase on arrival, or do I make it much later? My understanding is that in order to get the $1.25 an acre, you still had to do some kind of demonstration. You had to have some kind of demonstration that you've done some minor improvement to the land. That was my understanding, but
I think that's wrong. But
yeah, like I said, that's
yeah.
So again, if the cash purchase is usually made by homesteaders at the end of the 5-year period and non-homesteaders at the beginning, then it's not an apples and apples comparison. We might have to adjust it. Another thing is that the estimated success rate that I've seen from the Bureau of Land Management is basically the number of people that applied in period S and actually obtained title in period S plus 5. That's about 40%. And so that raises a question, what happens to the unsuccessful homesteader? Do they show up on your data? In terms of other questions you could continue to ask. I think this question.
Where did you get that last bullet from?
The BLM website.
Okay.
Yeah. So they had said that
I wonder if that's people who actually went, or if an application is.
So right, there's this 2-stage process. You file the initial, hey,
Right.
I've settled, I'm on this land. I'm going to come back in 5 years and show that I've owned it, and then there's the subsequent.
So you think it's 40% already for people who did move, who did go there? It's not even earlier, like I'm just gonna claim the land, but then I never.
Yeah. So my understanding from the brief looking at this that I've done is that
This morning.
it's 40% of what? It's 40% of the people that had filed the initial plan, and so exactly how many of those people showed up?
Yeah.
Exactly how many of those people were there for more than one's.
Can you
More
go
than-
back to
more
the
than one
slide that
summer?
you're debating on? I'm sorry, you seem to have skipped past
Oh.
it. It says, okay, yeah, thank you.
Estimates of the success rate are 40%.
Yeah.
So I'll
That's
send you a
right.
reference for that.
Yeah.
So this raises a question, because I think the BLM also has digitized these these records of the initial application. I think you can do something about these failures. And then other things you could look into: risk from strategic interaction.
Can I quickly respond, because it might actually shape the questions? Real quick. So that's an important point right now. So we actually, when we say, okay, you got the land granted in 1870, we're looking at cash purchases in the 5 years prior because of this 5-year lag with which things happen. So we could just say, combine it with anyone who purchased land exactly 5 years prior, but we're deliberately a little bit more loose than that because the process is a little bit more loose than that. So we combine within 5 years, we call you one farm if the same person got the land. But you're absolutely right. A person who applies for homestead, buys cash sale land, then doesn't get the homestead but keeps the cash sale land, shows up in our data the same as a person who never applied for the homestead in the first place at the moment. And I'm happy that in your 5 minutes of research this morning, you found out for us that we can actually get these remaining 50% of the grants. If we can, then we could solve that problem. But as it stands right now, we're not doing it. With the data pilot that we've run, what's informed our model is basically 2 things. The homestead gives you land for free. So whenever you get land for free, you shouldn't really see farm size go down. Farm size should always go up when you get land for free. We see it go down, so we know that selection is going to play an important role. So we know that a lot of the story has to be about, with the Homestead Act, people settle on the frontier who previously wouldn't have settled on the frontier. And selection, our model is all going to work through budget constraints at the individual eye level. So immigrants were poorer than native white Americans. The other thing we see is that farms further away from the frontier were smaller. And that's why we set up the production function in the way that you eat your own product and then you sell the leftover, so that a smaller farm has less left over, so they care less about being further away from markets. That's motivated by an empirical fact that we see in the data, which is that the frontier, the true frontier farms, they're all very small.